Why America is the world hegemon. How the dollar became an international currency. How the US dollar harvests the world's wealth. Let's talk in depth about the United States. America is a nation of the march of making a fortune. In the beginning of 20th century, World War I broke out, when Germany poured more than 4 million shells into French positions, threatening to make Wagner meat grinder for the French army. Americans in the Atlantic Ocean basked on the warm beaches of Florida, when the German battleship rushed into the Jutland waters aggressively and smashed the British cruiser into the seabed. The American Western cowboy was galloping on the grassland, feeling the passage of time, as the British stormed the Germans on the Somme, sacrificing 60,000 soldiers and advancing only 3 miles. American farmers in Georgia were complaining about bollworms that were plunging their cotton yields. Wait until the treaty and allies both sides suffer. The United States, which watched the fire from the other side, entered the battlefield implicitly, become the last straw to overwhelm the German army. After the war, the Paris Peace Conference. The United States wants to divide the world with Britain and France, but despised by them. Although beginning in 1894, the United States has become the world's largest industrial output. China, also a victorious country in World War I, also realized that weak countries have no diplomacy, initiated the famous May 4th movement. The United States was upset and embarked on isolationism. The war outside is raging and full of holes. United States is also indifferent, remaining neutral. The first to lend money to Britain and France to fight the war. They poured arms and sold supplies to the camps of both sides. Made a lot of gold. In order to avoid risks, European countries moved gold to the Federal Reserve Bank of the United States. United States owned 2/3 of the world's gold at the time. By 1941, the British and French coalition forces were dying and at an absolute disadvantage. British Prime Minister Churchill appealed to the United States countless times, but United States remained indifferent. Perhaps Japan felt Churchill's sincerity, decided to help him. 350 planes were dispatched to bomb Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. This bombing attack made Japan regret it. Looking at the devastated Pearl Harbor, Americans closed their Bibles, officially declare war on fascism. The industrial engine is in full swing. United States has built 300,000 aircraft, 100,000 tanks, and more than 1,500 warships, including 150 aircraft carriers. Completely turned the tide of the battle. America strikes while the iron is hot. Before WW2 was over, 44 heads of state were invited to hold a meeting. Earnestly said, "Our future international trade. Let's settle it all in US dollars. There is a lot of gold in my vaults. If you need, you can exchange $35 for 1 ounce of gold." Everyone here was silent for a moment. The former British Empire on which the sun never sets began to get restless. Want to protest? But London has been battered by bombs. Must rely on the United States to rebuild. So there is no reason to argue. After World War II, Japan was cornered. Young and old, men and women, to participate in military training. All the people are soldiers, implement scorched earth confrontation. Finally, the 2 atomic bombs made Japan completely lose the confidence to resist desperately. Unconditional surrender. WW2 ended. The United States implements the Marshall Plan. Help Europe rebuild. It spreads the concept of gold equals dollar, deepening Europe's reliance on the dollar. Various countries import American goods in large quantities. But the United States underestimated the growth rate of world productivity, overestimated the amount of gold mined each year, leading to less and less gold reserves. We can only keep printing money to stabilize the market. Combined with the Korean and Vietnam Wars, US military spending soars. Gold reserves flowed out. People worry about whether they can get an ounce of gold for $35. After the first difficult days, European countries began to have their own thoughts. Since most goods can be self-sufficient, why spend dollars on American products? Not to mention that American products cannot replace French perfumes, Swiss watches, and Austrian crystals. As a result, Europe began to boycott the dollar and issue its own currency. French President Charles de Gaulle took the lead, exchanged $2.3 billion for 2,000 tons of gold, and sent warships and planes to escort them back to France. De Gaulle did not feel that he was not satisfied enough, and held a press conference to beat US like a wet dog. The gold reserves in the United States are seriously insufficient, let's go grab it. Other countries followed suit, desperately running on gold. We don't want dollars, we want gold. US President Nixon saw the rapid decline in gold reserves and hurriedly played a rogue. I declare that dollars cannot be exchanged for gold. History calls this historical event the Nixon shock, the collapse of the Bretton Woods system. Once the dollar loses its place in the world, US global hegemony will be out of the question. As a result, the United States turned its attention to liquid gold, oil. There is a legend in the Middle East. Just shovel casually in the desert. Black liquid will come out. When the ignorant locals are still kneeling to worship the gods. Western capitalists came in stride. It soon monopolized oil extraction and evolved into the Big Seven of oil. BP, Royal Shell, NJ Standard, California Standard, Gulf Oil, Mobil, Texaco. Among the Big Seven, the United States accounted for 5. Occupy 60% of oil extraction. Capital is profit-seeking. Do everything possible to suppress the purchase price of oil. Originally, countries in the Middle East could still drink soup in the back. Now only the soup residue is left. The Middle East was furious. The first to stand up against it is Venezuelan Oil Minister Alfonso. He posted a moments. Oil is a national asset. Shall belong to a sovereign state. Foreign companies must not interfere. Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Iran, and Kuwait all liked it. Several Middle Eastern powers got together. The Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries was established. Referred to as OPEC. Externally declared, the price of our oil. It's up to us to decide. With the growing number of OPEC members, America frowned. Finding things are not simple. It does not want great unity in the Arab world. So support Israel. Let it gain a foothold in the Middle East. Gradually form a united Arab world. Cannot tolerate Israel. So fight every day. Ashamed. Arab soldiers always lose more and win less. June 5, 1967. The Third Middle East War broke out. Israel strikes first and is stronger. It only took 6 days. Defeated Egypt, Jordan, and Syria. More than 60,000 casualties in 3 countries. Israel only suffered 983 casualties. It also occupied 65,000 square kilometers of Arab land, by the way. The Soviet Union was so angry. Point at them and curse hard. Bunch of trash. Egypt and Syria endured. Vowed to take back the lost ground. Jordan's face was ashen, overwhelmed. 6 years later, the Fourth Middle East War broke out. Egypt and Syria learned from their lessons. A surprise attack was launched against Israel. Their attack date was October 6, 1973. This day happens to be the Jewish Day of Atonement. Everyone in Israel is on holiday. Can be caught off guard. Everything is so perfect. Unfortunately, there is a traitor in the Arab camp, Jordan. Jordan is a small country. Half the land was lost 6 years ago. It is afraid of losing again this time. So the king of Jordan personally went to Israel to tip off. Boss, Egypt and Syria are coming to beat you. This information aroused Israel's attention. As soon as the war began, Egypt, Syria and Jordan are overwhelmingly dominant. Break Israel's defenses. But Israel has advanced weapons provided by the United States. Don't panic at all. Turn the tide of the battle from the third day. Beat the Arab countries without temper. Raise the white flag. The Middle East couldn't beat it, so had to change another way. In retaliation for America's aid to its enemies, Arab countries increase oil prices. An oil embargo was announced against the United States, Western Europe and Japan. Thus, the first oil crisis officially started. America in the 1970s. Highly industrialized. Cars run all over the street. The surge in oil prices hit America's weak point in an instant. GDP fell by 4.7%. The bad things come in succession. Allies began to part ways. Europe and Japan quickly succumbed. Politically distanced itself from the US. Shout out, "We are innocent." It is the US supporting Israel. This oil crisis also let the world know that OPEC is not easy to mess with. Only in 1974, OPEC's oil revenue is $115 billion. Contributed to the largest wealth transfer in human history. OPEC's oil price hike. Get the Soviet Union excited. The Soviet Union was also a major oil producer. Raised the price of oil in a hurry. Also signed the US-Soviet oil trade agreement with the United States. The Soviet Union provided oil, and the United States provided commodities. America feels aggrieved and annoyed. Decided to solve the oil problem in the Middle East. It soon discovered that, since the world depends on oil, as long as oil is controlled, the world can be controlled. So, the United States pulled Saudi Arabia to its side. Coercive and enticing said, "Oil can go up in price, but it must be settled in dollars." Saudi is also a coward. After tasting the benefits given by the United States. Timely retreat. Other Arab countries also shyly agreed. Little do they know, it once again contributed to the dominance of the US dollar. As such, in order to import oil, countries in the world can only produce goods in exchange for a large amount of dollars. Then use dollars to buy oil in the Middle East. Middle Eastern countries make a lot of dollars by selling oil. In addition to showing off their wealth crazy, they also invest. The best channels for investment are US banks, stocks and bonds. And what America does is simple. Produce tons of dollars with a money printing press. Then source goods all over the world. And let others serve you. This is the petrodollar circulation. The US economy is taking off again. America has benefited. Not just oil, but also pegs the dollar to many commodities. Former circulation. Steel dollar, coal dollar, non-ferrous metal dollar. The hot money flowing back to the United States. It was exported to overseas by Wall Street. Opened the era of global harvest. A country with a low level of development. The normal development route is 1. Initial stage. Exports of cheap goods such as minerals, crops, clothes and toys. Earn a lot of foreign exchange. To develop domestic industry. Engage in various infrastructures. 2. Midterm. Export and sell industrial commodities such as steel, cement, glass, electrolytic aluminum, etc. Earn a lot of foreign exchange. To further develop the domestic high-tech industry. And phasing out labor-intensive industries. 3. Later stage. Export and sell high-tech commodities such as automobiles, airplanes, chips, etc. A large number of foreign investment, reduce labor costs. At the same time, develop the internet and the financial industry. The above 3 steps. It is the only way for developed countries. Latin American countries also think so, but went astray. Fall into the capital trap. Couldn't get out until today. At the beginning, Latin American countries are influenced by neoliberal economics, borrowing a lot of foreign debt from the United States to develop the economy, open the domestic market, allow foreign capital and goods to come in freely, good and cheap foreign goods. It quickly defeated the local enterprises in Latin America. Collective closure. Foreign capital will also not invest money in Latin American infrastructure, because making money is too slow, and it's not good for control. So a lot of this hot money has flowed into real estate and the stock market. Accelerate the financial bubble. Seeing house prices and stock market soaring. Naturally, the locals have no intention of engaging in industry. Put their money into the stock market. Wait for the appreciation. Everything is so beautiful. Until 1979. Fed hikes rates. A lot of money is flowing out of Latin America. Back to U.S. Bank. Only the poor guy who has been exploited several times is left. Buy at a high level. The economic logic behind this is Fed hikes rates, leading to an increase in the interest rate of the Bank of America. That is, the interest on saving and borrowing money goes up. As such, those who borrowed money from U.S. banks to invest must pay back immediately. Otherwise, the later you delay, the higher the interest and the more you lose. And people who don't borrow money will find ways to deposit money in U.S. banks. Enjoy high interest. Let's look at Latin America. The thriving, prosperous economy withered instantly after capital fled. Real estate becomes worthless. The stock price went down like a roller coaster. And due to the long-term neglect of industrial construction, unemployment in Latin American countries has soared. The situation is turbulent, crime is frequent, gradually going into decline. This is the middle-income trap. People think they have one foot into the threshold of developed countries. In fact, it's not even a stepping stone. Everything is just an illusion created by capital. Of course, the economic bubble in Latin America did not burst immediately. There are still many capitals who want to observe and evaluate the follow-up situation. Reluctance to escape back into the arms of U.S. Bank. To force these investors to leave, there is still a little chance. Argentina stood up in time. See how I drive away this group of evil capital. In 1981, inflation in Argentina is 6 times higher than before. GDP fell 11.4%. People in the country went on strike to protest, just about to overthrow the government. President Galtieri was very anxious. He can't solve the domestic economic problems. It can only divert people's attention. The best way to divert attention is foreign war. Galtieri took his idea to the British Falklands and went to visit US President Ronald Reagan. Probing questions. Big brother, do you agree with me going to fight the British island? Reagan was silent for a while. It's about you and England. I neither support nor oppose it. Galtieri thought the US had acquiesced. A beckoning, drag the Argentine cannon out for me, hit. Soon, the British Falklands were occupied by Argentina. The people of the country cheered. And Galtieri's face, smiling like a flower blooming. British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher in the Atlantic Ocean was furious. To restore the glory of the empire on which the sun never sets, let the aircraft carrier bang out. At this time, the United States immediately changed its face. This is a shameful act of aggression. Galtieri was immediately dumbfounded. There was no suspense in the war. And the British successfully recaptured the Falklands. A few days later, Galtieri sadly stepped down. This war in Latin America let European and American investors lose confidence and leave. The Fed hikes rates again, and has done so many times before. Latin America's economy is officially en route. In August 1982, the Mexican government reluctantly announced, "I'm sorry, we can't pay the debt." It's a chain reaction. Countries such as Venezuela, Brazil, Argentina, Peru, and Chile have announced, "We can't pay off our debts either." By the end of 1986, the total debt of Latin American countries reaches $1 trillion. Of course, European and American countries will not remain indifferent. Those bankrupt companies, real estate, stocks, and mining resources, they were all bought by foreign capital. In addition, the IMF, International Monetary Fund, also lends money to Latin American countries to get through the crisis. The IMF is not a charity. Like a loan shark, you have to sell all your dignity. The IMF conditions are: Latin American countries use 40% of their fiscal revenue to repay debts every year. It is also necessary to liberalize the foreign exchange market and the financial and banking system. Lay off a large number of state-owned enterprise employees. Cut government spending. Sounds a bit like a defeated nations treaty. The 1980s was the lost decade for Latin American countries. But for Mexico and Argentina, it lasted longer. In 1994, another financial crisis broke out in Mexico. In 2018, Argentina experienced a currency crisis. Crises in these countries. The trigger was the Fed raising interest rates. The root cause is its own economic fragility. In other words, the United States does not want these little brothers to develop. In this way, the exploitation can continue for a long time. Through this financial colonization, the Fed has wiped out one emerging country after another. Next target, Japan. Japan is not the same as Latin American countries. After World War II, Japan started from ruins. Supported by the United States, act as a bridgehead against the Soviet Union. Despite Japan's humiliating signing of the Japan-US Security Guarantee Treaty, the surface is still submissive. Got a large number of military orders from the United States. Heavy industry recovered quickly. In the early days, the Japanese were as hardworking as the Chinese, struggling to produce high-quality and cheap goods, sell to the whole world and earn a lot of foreign exchange. Then step-by-step industrial upgrading. The economy quickly grew by leaps and bounds. By 1970, Japan's GDP was second only to the United States. Become the second largest economy in the world. Ambitious Japan, not content with producing cheap goods, started to develop machine tools, cars, chips, televisions and steel. In the late 1970s, there was second oil crisis. The two oil crises severely impacted the US auto industry. But it gave the Japanese car salted fish a chance to turn over. Japanese cars are not only cheap, but also fuel efficient. At that time, it accurately hit the pain point of the Americans. Since then, the rise of Japanese cars is unstoppable. Export sales have been on the rise, seriously crowding out the European and American auto markets. By 1980, Japanese car production surpassed that of the United States for the first time. Be the number one in the world. Japan occupies 20% of the semiconductor, 30% of the automobile and 50% of the machine tool market. Unstoppable. In the financial market, Japan is also the largest creditor of the United States. The funds held account for 25% of the NYSE trading volume. In the same year, the U.S. goods trade deficit with Japan reached $50 billion. Countless industrial areas have been hit. American workers have lost their jobs in large numbers. Great Lakes businesses went bankrupt. Japan slaughtered everything. Also did not give up the light industry market. Speakers, TVs, and refrigerators take over the US. Just like Chinese goods today. Unemployed American workers are angry and start anti-Japanese marches. Smash TVs, smash cars. As long as they are Japanese products, they will all be smashed. To revive a strong America, the United States decided to attack Japan. The first is to raise tariffs to restrict the export of Japanese products. Then launched an antitrust investigation into Japanese cars and electronic products. Even banned Japanese companies from acquiring high-tech companies. Hitachi executives were also arrested for allegedly stealing IBM technology. Japan did not struggle and was quite cooperative. Actively restrict exports, reduce tariffs. It also opened up many important markets to the United States. But Japan's momentum is too strong. The US cannot reverse the trade deficit. In fact, since the implementation of Reaganomics, the United States has embarked on the road of financial founding. The hollowing out of the industry is getting worse. America understands this well. After struggling for a while, give up automatically. Start playing with more insidious tricks. In September 1985, the United States, Japan, Germany, France, and Britain signed the Plaza Agreement at the Plaza Hotel in New York. The core content is, let the currencies of Japan, Germany, Britain, and France appreciate. But the US can play with Japan at will, because Japan is only a domestic servant of the US. Britain, France, and Germany seem to be submissive. Let its own currency appreciate, but it has been controlled to a small extent. Although the United States knows their tricks, it does not dare to scold them. But the US can play with Japan at will. Because Japan is only a domestic servant of the US. On the surface, after the US made the yen appreciate, Japanese goods sold more expensively. There will be no export competitiveness. The Japanese government also judged that even if the yen appreciates, it will not shake the Japanese economy. On the contrary, the ability to invest overseas has been enhanced. But in fact, the real intention of the US is to snipe Japanese finance. Completely destroy the Japanese economy. Then buy it at a low price. Latin American countries are a lesson for Japan. The yen did appreciate. Exports of Japanese companies have been severely affected. But it didn't go in the direction the United States expected. Because the Japanese are too hard on themselves. They do everything possible to keep production costs down. Even if the yen appreciates sharply, merchandise exports still have some slim margins. In addition, the Japanese are too risk-aware and neither like to speculate in stocks nor in real estate. Even if Japan opened up its financial markets, it would make Wall Street in the United States unable to take action. 2 years later, President Reagan found that America had not changed, let alone great. Reagan was very annoyed. In fact, the Japanese economy at that time was already hanging by a thread. Originally, the appreciation of the yen has greatly reduced the profits of export companies. Many companies even reduced production lines. Set up new factories in China and Southeast Asia to transfer costs. China and Southeast Asian countries. Whether it is labor or production materials, the cost performance is very high. If it is produced in Japan, the cost is not comparable at all. This led to the closure of batches of Japanese companies, resulting in Japan's industrial hollowing out. Workers continued to lay off. Although Japan is suffering, the US does not take it seriously and continues to coerce Japan to cut taxes and expand domestic demand. Because only Japanese people have spare money to buy American products. Japan followed suit and implemented a new policy. Tax cuts of 1 trillion yen and investment of 5 trillion yen to expand domestic demand. With this policy, Japan has finally collapsed. Those Japanese business owners have huge sums of money and have nowhere to put them. Since the manufacturing industry continues to lose money, then put money into real estate and the stock market. The historical experience of Latin American countries began to be staged in Japan. At this time, Japan also implemented the 6 trillion new policy. The original intention was to reduce taxes for Japanese companies, and then by throwing money to stimulate domestic market demand. But since the government is willing to give money, and the interest rate of the bank borrowing money is so low, everyone will definitely lend money to invest in finance. Who wants to continue to engage in business? As a result, Japanese middle-class people invested a lot of money in foreign exchange, stock market and real estate market. The situation got out of control. Overseas capital has been waiting for this moment for a long time, entering the market one after another, raising the financial bubble. Even any old Japanese man on the street in Tokyo knows that the stock market and housing prices are soaring. Everyone went crazy with capital. From 1984 to 1989, Japanese stocks rose 368% and land prices tripled. Tokyo is lost, and everyone seems to have money to spend. Japanese economist Yukio Nogu felt something was wrong. It's an abnormal phenomenon, but everyone takes it for granted. He published an article in a magazine in 1987. The title is Bubble-Inflated Land Prices. But no one cares about Yukio Nogu's worries. At this time, middle-aged Japanese women have already started the overseas shopping frenzy. Since 1987, the total amount of artworks purchased by Japan from overseas has exceeded 1 trillion yen. Van Gogh's famous painting, Sunflower, was sold for 5.8 billion yen. Picasso's Marriage at Pierrette reached 7.4 billion yen. Someone else bought Renoir's Dance at the Pancake Mill for 11.9 billion yen. Japanese folk chat topics are like this. The paintings bought at the Ginza Gallery were sold to other galleries, and they made millions of yen in a few minutes. Famous paintings are the land hanging on the wall. If you sell Tokyo, you can buy the whole of America. You can buy the whole of Canada with just land in Queens. Honolulu is about to become a district of Tokyo. In 1989, Rockefeller Center, Columbia Pictures, Universal Pictures and Tiffany Building fell into the hands of the Japanese. The Acquisition of America program gave the Japanese a $600 billion US asset. Standing at the turning point of the times, Euripides had long predicted, God will make him mad if he wants to perish. In fact, since 1989, the Federal Reserve has raised interest rates. A lot of hot money fled the Japanese stock market and property market. But the crazy Japanese boom is still a long way from collapse. Or, the Japanese have too much money. Only by giving a fatal blow can Japan's economic lifeline be strangled. The U.S. decided to add fuel to the fire and signed a stock betting agreement, Stock Index Futures, with Japan. The main content of this agreement is: Americans bet on the Japanese stock market falling, the Japanese bet on the stock market rising. If the index rises, Japan wins. If the index falls, the US wins. The more it fell, the more money the Japanese lost. Whether it rises or falls, the United States must first pay a fee to Japan. This makes the Japanese have the illusion of whatever you do, you can win. At that time, the Japanese stock market was in turmoil. No one thought that it would fall, so it was very easy to sign the agreement. After that, the United States listed this agreement, referred to as Nikkei Certified Put Warrant. Anyone who buys this put warrant can make a profit when the Japanese stock market falls to a certain extent. As a result, the capital of the world united and severely suppressed the Japanese stock market. Let the yen plummet by 70%. Japan is heading for a major collapse, the economy is hit hard. Over the years, the American assets that were recklessly acquired by Japan have now spit out all the capital and profits. Japanese companies went bankrupt one after another and were acquired by foreign investors. Countless Japanese middle-class people lined up to walk on the balcony, ending their lives with resentment and doubts. Japan has also ended its period of rapid development and entered a 20-year bottleneck period until today. The Japanese author Yoshikawa Uenjong said, "When Japan's national defense lifeline is in the hands of the United States, such a result can be said to be inevitable." Japan's economic crisis, like dominoes, has shifted to Southeast Asia, and a more catastrophic Southeast Asian financial crisis is just around the corner. The four tigers in Asia are Thailand, Malaysia, Philippines, and Indonesia. In the 1980s and 1990s, due to the strong appreciation of the yen, businessmen from Europe, U.S., and Japan went south and invested in a large number of labor-intensive industries in Southeast Asia, driving the economic takeoff of the four little tigers. But the four little tigers made the same mistakes as Latin American countries. They wanted to run before they learned to walk. Take Thailand as an example. The financial risk resistance is weak in the first place, but it is necessary to relax financial supervision. Allow capital to freely use foreign exchange at home and abroad, and do not impose any restrictions on foreign investment in stocks. The industrial base is already quite weak, but in order to boost economic growth rapidly, companies are allowed to borrow freely from foreign countries. However, after these Thai companies borrowed foreign debts, they refused to do industrial and infrastructure construction in a down-to-earth manner, followed foreign capital to speculate in stocks, real estate, and land, then created a financial bubble. History is always strikingly similar. Thai people do not have the ability to distinguish. Seeing that the stock market and house prices soared, they followed suit, become a poor victim. The first to attack Thailand was a capital consortium headed by Soros. Soros famously said, "In terms of financial operations, there is no morality or immorality, it's just an operation." The Soros have a lot of Thai baht in their hands. Once the Thai baht is sold in the international market in exchange for US dollars, the price of the Thai baht will plummet instantly. When the price of the baht hit rock bottom, they could buy back the baht in dollars, earn the difference, and buy Thai companies on the brink of bankruptcy. If the Thai government wants to stabilize the price of the Thai baht, it can only use its own dollar reserves to buy back as much Thai baht as the Soros sell. The Thai government will use the dollar to buy back as much. So this is a very simple and violent currency offensive and defensive battle. And it is a competition to see who has more funds in their hands. The Thai government is poor and has no dollar reserves at all. And the enemy is not only the Soros, but also a group of blind followers who want to sell the Thai baht. So the Thai government surrendered after only a week. In July 1997, the Thai baht depreciated by 30%. A large amount of capital fled, and the Asian financial crisis officially detonated. After the capital giants have eaten Thailand, the next stop is the Philippines, then Indonesia, Malaysia. The apparent prosperity of the four little tigers in Asia collapsed in an instant. But Malaysia is angry. "If you want to sell my currency, then I will implement exchange rate control and prevent you from selling it." This move by Malaysia surprised Western countries collectively. The former chairman of the Federal Reserve said a little helplessly, "You are now banning foreign capital from leaving. It feels great. But don't try to attract foreign investors in the future." When the four tigers in Asia were completely paralyzed, the IMF, who played the hero, stood up again. "I have the cash here to lend you money to get through the crisis." Of course, the prerequisite is Thailand, the Philippines and Indonesia moved to tears and signed many unequal treaties with the IMF. Only Malaysia rolls its eyes. "I don't need your shit." After defeating the four tigers, the Soros were not satisfied. This time, the target is aimed at the four little dragons: Hong Kong, Taiwan, Singapore, and South Korea. Strictly speaking, Soros is using people's fear and blind obedience. As long as he ignites the fuse first, the capital behind will follow. Soon, Singapore and Taiwan kneeled first. South Korea is not immune, seeing the yuan falling and needing a lot of capital to stabilize. So the funds were withdrawn from Russia. Man, sorry, my house is on fire. As soon as South Korea's funds were withdrawn from Russia, there was a chain reaction, and foreign investors followed suit, causing Russia to trigger the first round of financial crisis. The wealth of South Korea is so tempting that Wall Street refuses to show any sympathy and vows to beat the Korean won. In the end, Korean companies went bankrupt and society was in disarray. At first, South Korea was reluctant to accept the IMF's love aid. Brother, I really don't take loan sharks. Later, the desperate South Korea accepted $57 billion in aid from the IMF, on the premise that 1. Release the capital market control and implement liberalization. 2. Open the securities market to foreign investors. 3. Increase the proportion of foreign capital in domestic enterprises from 25% to 50%. That year, the suicide rate in South Korea soared by 50%. Western media used the "city forgotten by Santa Claus" to record the Christmas of the people of Seoul. The economic looting of South Korea is not over yet. In addition to the normal economic colonization of European and American companies, South Korean chaebols have fallen one after another. Samsung Group was dismembered. Daewoo Group's auto division was bought cheaply. Korea Post knelt down in front of British Telecom. South Korea's 8 largest banks are firmly controlled by foreign capital. Therefore, South Korean President Moon Jae-in did not dare to attack the chaebol, because the US military stationed in South Korea has already explained everything. The 4 Asian tigers, only Hong Kong is left. According to Western public opinion, Hong Kong has become an ATM for international speculators. In fact, Hong Kong is the only one that stubbornly blocks the plunder of the capital predators, which has made the Soros taste the frustration. The reason is, there is a big boss supporting Hong Kong. On March 19, 1998, Premier Zhu Rongji made a clear statement. In case the SAR needs the help of the central government, as long as the SAR government makes a request to the central government will do whatever it takes to maintain Hong Kong's prosperity and stability and protect its linked exchange rate system. No amount of money behind Soros could compare to the huge US dollar reserves in mainland China. He finally left. The Asian financial crisis has officially come to an end. A lot of hot money has returned to the United States. This time, the financial predators will point to the increasingly prosperous US subprime mortgage market. Yes, Wall Street is crazy. Even the American people are not spared. The Fed raises and cuts interest rates regularly. When you need to harvest the world's wealth, cut interest rates. The harvest is almost over, the rate hike. This set of punches has been played in the United States for 30 years. Since 2000, the Federal Reserve has entered a cycle of interest rate cuts. Start throwing bait. Reduce bank loan interest and let everyone invest all the money in the bank. But the plot gradually deviates from the direction. In 2007, the subprime mortgage crisis broke out. The United States collapsed first. The financial bubble was pushed up by Wall Street. The specific process is: 1. There are many poor people in the United States who cannot afford a house. Commercial banks lend generously to them, regardless of their ability to repay. The reason is that home prices in the United States continued to rise at the time. Even if the poor cannot repay, the bank can make a lot of money simply by auctioning the house. 2. But the bank wants to cash out quickly and knows that these debts are a ticking time bomb in their own hands. So they are packaged and resold to Wall Street investment banks. Wall Street investment banks are not fools. They packaged these debts into financial products and sold them to ordinary people again. 3. The common people are also not fools and have concerns about these financial products. So Wall Street pulled the insurance company into the mud pit, patted his chest and said to the common people, Buy it with confidence, an insurance company will help you pay. Above, whether it is mortgage holders, commercial banks, Wall Street investment banks or insurance companies. Everyone seems to be making money and thriving. But things are spiraling out of control as the risk of default by home loan holders increases. Mortgage holders could not repay the money, commercial banks confiscated a large number of houses, then auctioned them on the market, resulting in a drop in house prices. Housing prices have fallen. Many mortgage holders are more reluctant to take out loans. The total amount of my loan is several times higher than the market price. It's not reasonable. As a result, there are more and more default risks. Housing prices are getting lower and lower, banks cannot receive money. The bubble is naturally burst. Interestingly, Dick Fuld, the CEO of Lehman Brothers, took $500 million in salary before the company went bankrupt. More financial predators have already had enough to eat, waiting for the US government to rescue the market. The US government regrets and fears, so it can only turn on the money printing machine, print money frantically, to keep cutting interest rates. As a result, the dollar and US bonds held by various countries have depreciated. The United States succeeded in transferring the crisis to the world, creating a series of chain reactions. First, the EU. In fact, the euro has laid a minefield for itself from the moment it was born. Our history books say that the euro enables financial integration, greater openness of the economy, free movement of goods. A precondition here is that the economic level of EU countries should be consistent. But later, the EU member states expanded to 28. Some weaker countries have also squeezed in. Moreover, some countries are not only weak, but also owe a lot of debt, which everyone needs to share. Yes, it's Greece. EU countries have inconsistent levels of development and are unwilling to hand over financial power. Then the euro policy is very embarrassing. It may take care of this country and harm the interests of another country. And some countries secretly print money. Let the euro continue to inflate. On the other hand, the various high welfare policies of the EU have also led to frequent fiscal deficits. For example, Greece is a typical high debt, high welfare country. It is a bottomless pit for the EU. When the bottomless pits appeared one after another, the European debt crisis broke out. It started with Greece, then Italy, Portugal, Ireland, and Spain fell, piling on debt and making ends meet. The three major US rating agencies took the opportunity to downgrade the credit ratings of these countries, causing European capital to flee. Then it was North Africa's turn. The subprime mortgage crisis and the European debt crisis spread to the entire Arab world. Issues such as military dictatorship, economic recession, and religious and cultural conflicts broke out. December 17, 2010, Tunisia. Because of the economic downturn, 26-year-old Bouajizi worked as a hawker on the street. He was brutally treated by the local police, and finally died by self-immolation in protest. His death became a fuse, aroused the people of the Arab world uprising. The revolt is also known as the Arab Spring. When the Tunisian president saw that the wind was wrong, he hurriedly fled to Saudi Arabia. But the uprising has not stopped, showing the trend of a prairie fire. Algeria, Egypt, Libya, Syria, and other countries have protest movements. More than 1 million people even protested in the Egyptian capital Cairo. Syria civil unrest broke out in Libya. And the United States and other NATO countries began military intervention to overthrow the Gaddafi regime. After that, millions of refugees from the Middle East poured into Europe, which was a disaster for Europeans accustomed to living with high welfare. Liao said, "They've exhausted all the American names of liberal democracy. They used the names of the various seasons of the Arab Spring. They ran out of names for jasmine sunflowers. advocate for the people to rebel. But when the rebellion did not have any food to eat and the people became refugees. But they abandoned these hungry people. The British were the first to stand it and shouted to leave the European Union. Cameron, okay, let's vote. Passed. Oh no, I was just joking. Cameron steps down. 4 years later, on January 31, 2020, the UK officially left the EU. In Europe, due to the influx of refugees, terrorist attacks have become more frequent. And an undercurrent of extreme nationalism is surging. Weary Europe is getting farther and farther from the era of equality, inclusiveness and openness. Everyone knows who is the culprit behind all this. On September 12, 2018, European Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker complained. It's so ridiculous. The EU pays €300 billion in energy bills every year, but it is paid in US dollars. The EU imports only 2% of its energy from the US. It is also absurd that European airlines are paying for European planes in US dollars. But complaining is just complaining. Juncker is well aware that the petrodollar is the cornerstone of the US economy. Anyone who dares to challenge the status of the dollar will be met with retaliation. Therefore, when the euro was officially born, it meant that the European Union, which has a market of $27 trillion, would no longer be settled in US dollars. It is equivalent to cutting 1/3 of the global dollar market. Of course, the United States is not willing to give up. Even if it cannot be stopped, it will beat it. On March 24, 1999, the Kosovo War broke out. NATO, led by the United States, launched airstrikes against the Yugoslavia for more than 70 days without the authorization of the United Nations. It even accidentally bombed the Chinese embassy in Yugoslavia. The EU is still naive, thinking that the US just wants to attack the Yugoslav regime. As a result, after the war was over, the situation was turbulent, the euro plummeted by 30%. A large amount of funds fled. And all countries knew that they had been fooled. The US wants to tell all investors that the Eurozone is not safe. By the way, it also warns other challengers not to provoke the hegemony of the dollar. But Al-Qaeda stood up. I don't. 2 years later, the airliner hijacked by terrorists crashed into the World Trade Center in New York, USA. The 9/11 incident swept away America's hegemonic authority. Investors around the world are concerned about the safety of the United States. In order to win the confidence of investors, the United States hastily fought an Afghan war without adequate preparation. After the war, the Dow Jones Index rebounded, win back global confidence in the United States. Since then, more and more countries have challenged the status of the dollar. In Iraq, far in the Middle East, because of US sanctions, Saddam Hussein could not accept the all-for-food agreement. It was finally announced that oil would be settled in euros. Saddam's move attracted the support of Russia, Iran, Venezuela, and other countries, and successfully angered the Americans. The Middle East is the cradle of US oil hegemony. The dollar system will collapse if all oil-producing countries defect. Thus, the former US Secretary of Defense declared that Iraq possesses weapons of mass destruction, and took out a tube of suspected washing powder at the conference to prove it. The 7-year Iraq War began. Saddam died peacefully. After the two wars, the United States was overwhelmed and its national strength declined. Let China gain valuable development time. In 2009, when Obama was elected President of the United States, he found that China could no longer be suppressed. The hasty withdrawal of troops will pull the United States out of the anti-terrorism quagmire. On the surface, the United States pursues a policy of tout against China. The United States is no longer the locomotive of the world. But China doesn't like this. You're welcome, I'm still a developing country. Behind the scenes, the United States implements the Asia-Pacific rebalancing strategy. United Japan, South Korea, and Southeast Asian countries. Block the Pacific Ocean and block China Sea route. On the other hand, the United States has played a big role in the Jeju Islands and Hwanghyang Islands. Make every effort to prevent the establishment of the Northeast Asia Free Trade Area between China, Japan, and South Korea. There is already a Eurozone. The United States does not allow another Asian dollar zone to divide the US dollar market. The United States has also brought in a group of countries to establish a TPP agreement, the core content of which is to exempt China from tariffs, but exclude China. China starts to fight back. If you engage in TPP, I will stand up and join RCEP. American workers are very disgusted with this TPP agreement. Since the TPP is used to win over member states, there must be sacrifices, and the sacrifices must be American workers. In other words, although the United States enjoys all kinds of benefits in globalization, these have nothing to do with ordinary working class. The so-called rich get richer and the poor get poorer. In the past few decades, the United States would rather spend more than $12 trillion to wage war than to invest money in infrastructure construction or improve the education environment at the bottom. Since the subprime mortgage crisis, the unemployment rate in the United States has remained high. With the help of the US government, the capital giants will soon be able to get through the crisis without any damage. Finally, in 2011, the Occupy Wall Street movement broke out in the United States, and the working class denounced all capitalists. They caused the financial crisis, but it was us who suffered. This movement ended without a hitch. Nothing changed. Wall Street is still Wall Street. The government's partiality is very obvious. Bush, Clinton, Obama, Hillary. The American people hate these politicians and voted for Trump in the 2016 presidential election. The golden retriever finally came on stage, shouting, "I want to make America great again." The first thing Trump did on his first day at work was exit the TPP immediately. In order to please the American working class, Trump insists on building a wall on the US-Mexico border to stop illegal immigration. Dramatically tighten immigration policy to avoid taking American jobs. In addition, Trump wants to bring manufacturing back to the United States and vigorously attract investment. For example, let Foxconn come to the United States to build a factory. But this is too slow. Even if Trump is re-elected for 2 terms, the US manufacturing industry will not improve. As early as the 1970s, the United States began to deindustrialize and become a financial nation. Today, 85% of GDP comes from financial services and only 11% from manufacturing. The financial services industry does not need a large number of labor, can only provide hundreds of thousands of jobs at most. Trump understands that, in addition to pleasing American workers, also win over the Republicans, military industry, energy, tobacco. Since American workers want jobs and the Republican Party wants to make money, only the arms business can quickly satisfy the interests of the two factions. Only when military enterprises have business can they provide jobs. Subsequently, Trump pulled all NATO countries. You see, Russia is restless again. From now on, your annual defense spending will account for 2% of GDP. NATO little brother, well. Trump singled out Japan. My F-35 fighter jet is quite cheap. Do you know how to do it? The F-35 fighter jet has been pointed out by the US regulatory agency that there are 996 security risks. The heart of Japan does not want to buy, boss. Up to you. Trump smiled. I have a small appetite, so let's take 105. Trump also withdrew from the Iran nuclear deal, intensifying conflicts in the Middle East. then say to the Middle Eastern countries, "It seems like we're going to fight again. It's okay, I'll sell the weapons to you." The United States only has arms orders. If it is not used, it is easy to crowd the warehouse and become moldy. And so, the war in Syria began. On April 7, 2018, a chemical weapons attack occurred in Syria, killing more than 70 people. The United States, Britain and France strongly accused the Syrian government forces. Syria's UN representative Jafari accused the US of lying. But as soon as he spoke, the representatives of the United States and Britain got up and left. Everyone wonders why the Syrian government likes bombing women and children so much. Let yourself make a mess. Russia can't stand it anymore. Let us form an agency to investigate this matter. The United States, Britain and France rejected the proposal. Russia hesitated for a moment, or invite the United Nations Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons to investigate. The United States, Britain and France rejected the proposal. 3 days later, the United States, together with Britain and France, launched 110 Tomahawk cruise missiles at Damascus, the Syrian capital, and the waves cut through the sky. As soon as the war started in Syria, the military-industrial enterprises immediately benefited. British BAE and American Lockheed Martin rose sharply, and they all have a shareholder company behind them. It is the company where Philip May, the husband of British Prime Minister Theresa May, works. So when Aunt May resigned in tears, I had no sympathy for her at all. After Trump took office, he announced a series of tax cuts. The economic means are still the same. Let the Fed raise rates. It's just that it's getting less and less effective now. The United States has raised interest rates several times in a row, but failed to draw enough funds from China. Because China's exchange rate is strictly regulated. And China also began to use the yuan to settle oil, to combat the hegemony of the dollar, even through the AIIB to deploy the internationalization of the RMB. Other emerging countries are becoming more aware of the financial means of the United States. Gradually realize that only by vigor, usually developing industry and engaging in infrastructure can there be a way out. For example, in Kenya, the China-aided Mombasa-Nairobi Railway has brought a total of 46,000 jobs. Trained 15,000 skilled workers, 400 engineers and senior technicians. Contributes 1.5% to Kenya's annual economic growth. Compared with the influx of a large amount of capital, which caused a stock market bubble, and finally the economy was paralyzed. This kind of real industrial infrastructure assistance project is much better. No one is born willing to be lazy and backward. As long as there is a way up in front of you, as long as someone is willing to help him, he would grab that life-saving straw without hesitation and would not let go. Aiding infrastructure is the best charity in the world than preaching with a Bible. If you focus on the most remote mountainous areas in China, there are already bridges across the moat, there are tunnels across the mountains, and the signal base station covering the mountainous area, in vast rural areas. Compulsory education has eliminated most illiteracy, the water and electricity network facilities are perfect. Color TV, refrigerator, air conditioning has become standard. Even in the poorest areas, as long as the infrastructure is perfect, the bond with modern civilization will not be broken, and there is hope for everything. It is undeniable that because of China's centralized system, similar to Singapore, there will inevitably be many human rights, unfairness, corruption and other issues. But at this stage, the objective fact is that China is still a growing force. After feeding the privileged class, ordinary people can still enjoy certain benefits. The United States is very clear that even if it launches rounds of trade sanctions, the impact on China will not be large. Because China's export dependence only accounts for 18.1%. Its exports to the United States account for 1/3 of its total exports. Therefore, any measures that can bring down China will be implemented. When the new crown epidemic swept the world, attracting allies in public opinion to attack China, it has become Trump's daily task. On March 16, 2020, the US stock market melted again. The Dow Jones plummeted 2,997 points, and Trump tweeted, "The United States will strongly support industries that are greatly affected by the Chinese virus, such as airlines. We will be stronger than ever." Trump tried to blame the American people's complaints about the government and the stock market, as well as the uncontrollable epidemic situation, all on China, and turned to racism and xenophobia against Chinese people. Berman Law Group even filed a lawsuit, taking China to court, arguing that China should pay damages to the United States for the economic stimulus it caused, claiming billions of dollars. In contrast, on March 16, the Federal Reserve lowered the bank's benchmark interest rate to zero and released $700 billion in water in an attempt to save the stock market. The stock market is still unable to save, and under a series of circuit breakers, Trump is already worried about whether he can be re-elected. What the United States is really worried about is actually Chinese technology. It has been blocked since more than 10 years ago, including military industry, high-end machine tools and semiconductors. Now that the United States is gradually falling behind in the 5G era, it can only jointly sanction Huawei with ARM, Microsoft and Google. The Oracle founder said on the show, "I think one of our big competitors is China. If we let China train more engineers than us, if we let Chinese tech companies beat our tech companies, before long, our military will also be closely behind China. Our economy is the same. We have intense competition with China. I'm on Team USA." I think a very important point is that in the competition with China, our democratic capitalism can win. We don't want to be second. The above remarks actually represent the true thoughts of most American entrepreneurs. Not only the United States, but the global IT industry is in a state of confusion, constantly advocating concepts such as holographic interaction, artificial life, immortality technology, consciousness control, memory sharing, brain networking, etc. Behind these concepts, there are basically no theoretical breakthroughs, let alone innovation. The current artificial intelligence has become a money-making tool. Many companies that do algorithm optimization, hardware integration, and big data just change their name and say they are AI companies. To achieve strong artificial intelligence, there is still a long way to go, and it is hopelessly far. The significance of scientific and technological progress is to keep making the cake bigger, so that those who share the cake will not fight for it. But once the size of the cake is fixed, and more people divide the cake, the contradiction begins. Either sit down and talk, or grab it from someone else, and all speak with fists. War isn't that far away, and nuclear suitcases aren't just a strategic deterrent. True peace, always within the range of a cannon. At least in the short term. It is difficult for human society to undergo major technological changes. So geographical disputes, population pressure, economic sanctions, and energy crises will become the norm. China really has no way out if compromise is made. The crises encountered by Argentina, Mexico, Brazil, Japan, Libya, Iraq, Russia, Thailand, the Philippines, Egypt, Singapore, Indonesia, Syria, Tunisia, Iran, South Korea, etc. listed above will be repeated. Taking history as a mirror, we can know the rise and fall. Today, the US spends more than 100 times more on welfare each year than in research and development of controllable nuclear fusion. It even shut down projects such as the Rocket Propulsion Plan and the superconducting Super Collider. Saving financial expenditures. Living well in the present life is far more meaningful than the unreachable, controllable nuclear fusion. Whether a nation has hope depends on whether they can look up to the stars. China is still sparing no effort to build large-scale scientific and technological projects. It has the world's largest aperture radio telescope Sky-Eye to observe life in the universe. Their Tiangong space station will be the only space station in orbit in the world. There is the Ring Positron Collider project, accurate measurement of the God particle. There is also the world's first quantum satellite to carry out experimental tests of quantum mechanics. Ren Zhengfei once said, "There are many shortcomings in China. Compared with the United States, the gap is still very large. The blood is boiling, the slogans are flying all over the sky. It's useless if you can't do it in the final battle. To be able to win is real. It takes decades to form a basic theory. If everyone doesn't take the theory seriously, and they all shout empty words, we will not be stronger in a few decades. Therefore, Chinese people should be practical in learning. Strive to change in mathematics, physics, chemistry, neurology, brain science. This is how you can stand up in this world. It is not easy for a person to accomplish one thing in a lifetime. With a population of 1.3 billion in China, if each person does one thing well, the combined strength is unparalleled. However, at the end of this video, I would like to express a personal opinion. I want to be able to strike a balance. Whether it's the Gettysburg Address or the Communist Manifesto. Hopefully they don't just stay on paper. Even if it's just a small step forward. Whether it is democratic capitalism, or totalitarian bureaucratic capitalism, or democratic centralism socialism. The world needs a diverse sample. Only then can human beings realize the true direction of progress.